Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and on TikTok. We've got another packed show for you this evening. Please do send in your comments, folks. Please do send in your greetings. Please do send in your questions. And let's talk about how much we love our United Kingdom and what is going to happen to it in the future. Now, tonight we're going to be talking about the new poll which came out today, which puts the Reform Party in third place, joint third place in the Holyrood election next year, May 2026. We're going to be talking about what that means. It still shows, however, the SNP being the leader. And unfortunately for the SNP, not having enough seats to command a government, but going to have to go once again into coalition. We'll be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about the immigration situation, as always, because that's going to be a big part of the 2026 election. John Swinney today talking about how much he loves immigration. Very tired platitude, quite frankly, that's not going to be sufficient for him in 2026, nor will it be sufficient for Anas Sarwar to roll out that old tired platitude either. So we're going to be talking about that. And we're also going to be talking about one or two other things, such as Greenland, what's going on in Greenland and what's going on with Donald Trump and what is the relevance, if any, for us here in the United Kingdom. So folks, let's say hello to you all. Debbie was straight in tonight. She says, good evening, everyone. Nice to have the warmer weather back. What does everyone think about Sturgeon's impending divorce? If you have a thought on that, please do send in your comments. Derek says, good evening, fellow unionists around the world. Well, no surprise, Nicola wants a divorce. I wonder who gets the camper van. That's cruel, Derek. Oh my. But we're all asking the same question. Persephone says, the election is going to be fixed and it's going to be won by the Islamic Labour Party. Well, if you're talking about the 2026 one, I don't think it's going to be won by them, really, but we'll see. We shall see. Derek comes back in and says, we need to be like last year, using tactics, make sure the SNP does not get back in, even if you have to vote for a party that you don't want. Well, that's the tactical voting. That's the tactical voting strategy, isn't it? And I know some people do support that, and others say, no, we're not going to be fooled again, because quite a few people don't like the fact that they voted for the Labour to keep the SNP out. And now the SNP is rising again in its performance because Labour is doing such a poor job. But, you know, that's politics, isn't it? That's politics. And as long as you understand that's politics, and it does change from day to day, and who knows what awaits us. We certainly, as Derek says, do not want another 5 years of the SNP in power if we can help it. Unfortunately, with the Holyrood Parliament, the SNP have been dominating it, and may or may not continue to dominate it. We'll have to see. We'll talk about that in a moment. Hi to Oksana and to Kat. Hello to you, ma'am, and hello to Catherine. Hello to Anthony over in Edinburgh. Good man. Good stuff. Well, let's talk about the new poll. It's a Survation poll. It came out today. We've got, let's put up one of the graphics that we've got here. In the next Scottish Parliament election, you will be given 2 votes. One vote will be to represent your constituency in the Scottish Parliament. If the election were tomorrow, who would you be most likely to vote for with your constituency vote? Now, that's the vote that's first past the post for your local constituency. And you're looking there, Scottish National Party coming in at 35%, Labour at 22%, Tories at 14%, and Reform at 13%. Now, that's the first past the post constituency. Coming in below them is Lib Dems at 8% and Greens at 6% and Alba at 1%. Okay, the next one, let's see what we've got. The second poll, your other vote will be a party list vote to elect representatives from your region. Now, Scotland is split into 8 regions, and that's your second vote. And your second vote is by proportional representation. And there's 7 candidates elected in each region. If the election were tomorrow, which party would you be most likely to vote for with your regional list vote? Similar statistics here. Scottish National Party, 31%, Labour, 21%, Tories at 14% again, Reform at 13%, Lib Dems at 10% and Greens at 9%, Alba at 2%. Doesn't really suggest a whole lot of difference between people voting on the first ballot and people voting in the second ballot. People seem to be keeping it fairly consistent, and Reform there getting 13% in both the constituency and the region. The question, though, is how does this translate? How does this translate into seats? Now, here we go. Sir John Curtis, recently knighted, has given his breakdown of how those percentages fall into seats. Now, there's 129 seats in the Scottish Parliament. One of those seats will become the presiding officer. So you have 128 MPs in the ring. But what he's done here is he's broken it down into the 129 seats anyway. And SNP in the lead with over twice what Labour have got. SNP at 53 seats. Now, that's significantly lower than a majority. A majority would be 65 seats. If they had 65 seats, they would be able to administer Scotland without any problem because they would outvote all the other parties put together. But here, they're nowhere near 65. They're down at 53. Coming in at second place is Labour with considerably fewer, 24. And in third place is Reform with 15, albeit jointly tied with the Tories at 15 seats. Lib Dems at 12 and Greens at 10. Now, okay. Now, well, there's what happened last time around in 2021. The SNP won 64 seats. So 53 seats would be a loss of 11. The Tories won 31 seats. So 15 seats would be a kind of decimation, really. They'd have lost over half their seats. Labour last time won 22 seats. So if they were to win 24 seats this time, they wouldn't really be doing particularly better than they did back in 2016 when they won 24 seats. So Labour would really just be kind of holding steady from 22 to 24 seats. It wouldn't be a great big Labour victory by any stretch of the imaginations. The Greens would be slightly up from their previous numbers of seats, which was 6 and 4 back in 2021. Okay. So what you're seeing there is the SNP doing much more poorly, but still maintaining a lead. Labour not really doing very much, losing support, presumably to reform. The Tories being cut in half, losing support to reform, and the Lib Dems and Greens possibly picking up some votes from disenchanted SNPers. So that's where we would be. But one good thing from a unionist perspective would be that the SNP would not be able to form a government, as it were, without a coalition. So that's where we would be standing. But what's remarkable there is 15 seats for reform. Now, what that means with these would all be regional seats elected by proportional representation from the 8 regions. So if you have 15 seats going to reform, that's almost 2 seats per region, isn't it? It says that there's going to be 7 seats where they get 2 candidates, and there's going to get one region where they get 1 candidate elected. 15 candidates would be amazing, absolutely incredible for a breakthrough party to do that straight away. And of course, the time servers in Holyrood are very, very worried about this possibility. They're disturbed about it. And John Swinney, I believe, was today. John Swinney, I don't think we have the actual video of John Swinney, but he was basically saying that he was going to confront reform. He was because of the danger of populism. Well, I thought about that. What's he going to do to confront reform? I mean, he's not like a confrontational person. All he can possibly do is spin out some old, tired platitudes about how reform's main issue, which is immigration, is somehow wrong. All he can do is spin out these old, tired platitudes about, diversity being our strength, or isn't immigration great, or whatever. And to be frank, Mr. Swinney, nobody's really convinced by that anymore. Okay, we don't. Maybe back in the days when there was only a few noticeable immigrants in our cities, did people really kind of just go along with that? But that's not the case anymore. People are not. You, Mr. Swinney, you're going to have a better way of dealing with this, other than just pulling out your old tired platitudes about diversity being Scotland's strength, when basically only you and your sort even agree with that anymore. Okay, so in other words, the SNP can't do anything in the face of reform, and to do something about it would require them to challenge their own perceptions of immigration, which they're not going to do because they're too invested in the system as it is at the moment. They're not going to turn around and go, you know what, maybe reform's got some good points. Maybe it doesn't actually work economically for us. Maybe it does keep wages low. Maybe it does make it harder to get a house or a flat. Maybe it is causing those social problems in our services. Maybe it is, but they'll never do that. They'll never do that. They'll simply say that the problem is we're not building enough houses. And the problem for that lies with Westminster. And if we just spend some more money, then everything's going to be hunky-dory. That's the approach that the SNP and Labour as well, will always take. They're not going to, and they cannot, because of the types of people that they cannot accept and admit that actually the reform analysis on immigration is the correct one. And so that's why reform is pushing at an open door in 2026. 15 seats, they might even get more. Now let's read out some of your comments here. Factions Guru, Reform UK surely taking more seats. Christopher is disappointed that the SNP gets so many. He has to doubt the quality of the electorate based on this if it's true. Paul says we need an outbreak of sanity. Christopher says the irony of the SNP, of all people, talking up diversity. Stephen says that's the problem. As long as the SNP exists, there is always the danger of them getting into power and pursuing separation. The only viable way to stop this is to get rid of the mechanism that enables them to do this, which is Holyrood. Well, I know that's your position, Stephen. That's very much a long-term project, because you have to get a party into Holyrood which wants to abolish Holyrood, and then you would need them to win sufficient numbers of votes that they could somehow force a referendum on the matter. It's certainly worth talking about. It's certainly worth talking about. Now, we are going to have a competition this program, but we're going to play it a little bit differently. We're going to have it about 7:45, and the person who wins will be the first person in the comments, either on Facebook or on YouTube or on TikTok. Good to see folk in the ring here on TikTok. Please send in your comments. Tell us if you are for keeping the UK together or if you are against it. Do you remember Unionists of Scotland, says Olympic. Not off hand. Was that a handle you're referring to? Dominic says coalition governments shouldn't be allowed. Stephen says it took UKIP 20 years to get a referendum on leaving the EU. That's true. That's the kind of time frame you are looking at on these kind of big matters. Now, where was I? I was talking there about reform and the likelihood of reform. Yes. So Swinney was asked today if he was worried by the rise in support for reform, and he added, quote, "I think it's got to be confronted. I don't agree with the outlook of reform. I talked earlier about the welcoming of people who come from other countries as migrants into our country to make a contribution. Did you really talk about that, John? Goodness me, you must be the first person in the world to have ever talked about that. That's such a groundbreaking new idea that one has never heard of before. You don't say, John. Isn't that wonderful? Quote, that has always been my view. It will always be my view. But that's not the view taken by those who either advocate reform or are prepared to cozy up to reform. And I will not cozy up to reform. I will confront them. By cozying up, what he means is if he only gets 53 seats, he's going to need allies. And so the question is, would he jump into bed, as the saying has it, with reform? And that would not be a pleasant sight for either partner, I can absolutely imagine. So that's what he's saying. He's not going to cozy up there to reform. And I'm sure reform will be delighted to hear that. And I tell you what will probably happen as well is nobody will cozy up to reform, not even the Tories. And they'll treat the centre-right Tories will treat reform in the way that the European parties treat the nationalist parties in Europe, which is that the Conservatives join up with the Socialists and the Communists, and they're all against the outlier. That's probably what will happen in Holyrood. That's why the people who get into Holyrood on behalf of reform had better be serious people, because they're going to come under attack, and they've got to be able to have the cojones to stand up and turn it around upon all the mainstream parties. It will be an exciting time, and I do hope that that happens and that reform get a good load of people in there. And as I said, Swinney and Anas Sarwar and all the others, they cannot properly confront reform without just mouthing a load of tired old platitudes, because their ideology, Swinney and Sarwar's ideology, is pro-immigration ideology, is built on shaky foundations. You know, it's built on a house of cards, on fraudulent theories, such as, for example, the notion that universal human rights trumps the human rights of the national citizen. That's why we have mass asylum, because we are told that their human rights, their universal human rights, trump our national rights to have secure borders and a safe homeland. It's such an appalling ideological lie, and as soon as you see through it, it collapses. And so people like Swinney and Sarwar and so on, they've got to maintain this idea that universal human rights trump national human rights. But once you see through that and dismiss it, it all just goes. Their ideology is also built upon the idea that immigration is a good thing economically, when studies which have access to the proper data show that it's far from a good thing. In fact, it's a cost. And the other shaky notions, everyone's entitled to asylum, that's built on the, as I said earlier there, the concept that universal human rights trump national human rights. They don't, unless you do not believe in nation states. If you believe in nation states, then the human rights of the national citizen must trump the human rights of the incomer. If you believe in nations, and that's where many of our politicians fall short. On that point, the Herbal Gerbil says, men fleeing war take women and children. Men going to war travel alone and in large numbers. Well, I know what you're suggesting there. Goodness me, that's sometimes what it feels like, an actual invasion. Immigration is nothing to do with Swinney. Of course, it's a reserved UK matter. That's so. However, it can also be raised in Parliament, and I would imagine that if Reform get elected, then they should waste no time in raising the matters, because at the end of the day, the Scottish Parliament does have control over matters which are tangentially related to immigration, such as housing, public services, as well as giving hundreds of thousands of pounds of our taxpayer money here in Scotland to various non-governmental organisations and charities that promote mass immigration. So Reform can work to at least highlight that fact towards the end of getting such organisations defunded here in Scotland. So while many issues are reserved, clever politicians can also exploit them for political purposes, and I hope that Reform is able to exploit it for Scotland's sovereignty in that sense. Oksana says, what about the other fringe parties? Well, as far as that poll was concerned, it didn't tell us who the others were that some people may have wanted to vote for. Now, I mentioned the fact of the economy being an issue. And there's a really very good article that was published in the Daily Telegraph on the 9th of January. And I just want to bring this up here. Here we are. It's called, "We're running out of time to fix Boris Johnson's betrayal over his immigration policies." Now, let me bring it up on the screen. And I just want to run through it. By Sam Ashworth-Hayes, who is producing some really, really good stuff these days. Really good stuff. A wave of low-skilled migration is about to become eligible for indefinite leave to remain and crush the public finances. And there's one of the people to blame for that. And he talks about how when Boris Johnson's administration unveiled its new immigration system in 2020, it promised to give top priority to those with the highest skills and the greatest talents, and overall reduce migration numbers. But what we actually got was the Boris wave, an unprecedented surge that saw net migration rise from 184,000 to almost 1 million in the year to June 2023. Now, that's net migration, which is to say immigration in minus emigration out. As we always say, net migration is the wrong measure. The only measure that counts is gross migration, which is to say the gross figure in. But anyway, let's use that 906,000, even though the gross migration in was about 1.3 million. He says it's hard to argue that what we have currently is a system geared towards bringing in the brightest and best. It's hard to argue that. Instead, we have a system designed less for economic dynamism than for alleviating short-term pressure on the public sector. And what he means here is that immigration is used to get cheap labour in, to get jobs in the public sector, particularly the care sector, filled, and basically to knock any other costs down the road for another government to worry about. He goes on, the policy that best illustrates this is the social care visa. Less than a year after debuting the new system, Boris and his ministers announced that carers would be added to the shortage occupation list. And he says the costs of this policy are becoming clear. The Office for Budget Responsibility has calculated that a low-skilled worker arriving at age 25 will immediately become a net burden on the public purse. By 75, if still resident in the UK, they will have cost the public a total of 421,000. If they live to 85, that figure is almost 800,000. And these are indisputably low-skilled workers. He believes the last 3 years of care worker immigration into the UK will cost roughly 61 billion net over the foreseeable future. And this is, of course, likely to be an understatement, because remember that each person arriving on the care visa scheme brought an average of at least one more dependent. And he reckons the cost of this scheme to the British taxpayer is likely to be £84 billion, which Boris Johnson, in this case, the man to blame, knocked that payment down the road a little bit so that he didn't have to worry about it, which is ridiculous when we remember the idea behind the policy was to save money. He says here, a huge share of social care is paid out of the public purse and from local authority budgets in particular. Spending decisions made in Westminster meant those budgets fell down in real terms, and that there was relatively little money for pay rises. And that's why they wanted to get in the cheaper care workers from abroad. Rather than pay out what the government estimated would be around $5 billion a year to give every single care worker in the country a pay rise, it chose to import cheaper workers instead. But here's the thing, after 5 years, these care workers will be free to apply for indefinite leave to remain. If they receive it, they'll be free to leave the sector and work somewhere else for higher pay. And the government in turn will resort to bringing in more workers to fill those vacancies which they just left. The short-term saving of avoiding a pay rise today is leading us into a fiscal catastrophe, by which he means the money coming in to government is going to be short and it's going to have to be raised in other ways. And he says, once you see this happening, you see it everywhere in the immigration system, including the glut of student visas issued, motivated in many cases by the prospect of 2 years' work on the graduate visa route. What's that saying is that people come in as students, and then after they've done their 1 year or 2 year course, they're allowed to stay for another 2 years to find a job, to find often a minimum income job, which a lot of British people themselves are trying to find at the same time. So, if you're looking for a minimum income job at the present, basically you're competing with the rest of the world, quite literally. So it seems it's a terrible thing that the government have done to the British citizens. Why did the government do this? As usual, short-termism. As far as students are concerned, the Migration Advisory Committee puts it that the sector has a, quote, over-reliance on immigration because the higher fees charged to foreign students are what is keeping the sector from toppling over. Well, if the sector can't survive without foreign students, it doesn't deserve to survive. So we do have this being immigration used basically just as a stopgap to knock costs further down the road. As he concludes here, over the next 2 years, many of those who arrived since 2021 will become eligible for indefinite leave to remain. Once this is granted, no matter how expensive they may turn out to be in the future, they can stay. So the priority for the government should be preventing this from happening by extending the time taken for eligibility, imposing fiscal contribution thresholds, by which he means imposing minimum salaries that you have to acquire before you can get the job. And in the longer term, shifting towards a guest worker model for short-term, low-wage work. The alternative is too costly to contemplate. A guest worker model. Absolutely, a guest worker model, not a get immigration in order to get indefinite leave to remain model. Because here's the thing with our system. If you get a work visa, you can, in many cases, apply just to stay in the country once that visa has run out. And if you stay in the country for long enough, and it's only 5 years, then you can become a citizen. And we have to ask ourselves, why do we have this crazy system? That's like something that maybe would have been suitable in the 19th century, when occasionally sailors would come aboard at the docks in Bristol and in London and in Glasgow, and they'd maybe work away, and you'd say, oh yeah, we'll give you some kind of citizenship now because you've lived here for the last 15 years. I mean, it's like the world has moved on. Britain's citizenship, the idea that you give somebody citizenship just because they lived here for 5 years, regardless of what they can contribute to the country, regardless of their compatibility to the country, these things are just mad. It's a mad idea. You shouldn't get citizenship unless you've lived here a generation, which is to say 25 years. And then if you want to apply for it, you should be able to show that you've got a lot of money. And one way of doing that is to purchase it, like maybe £10,000, a citizenship fee of £10,000 after you've lived here for 25 years. And if you can pass some kind of English written and oral communication test by 95%, you know, these are the sorts of things that should give you citizenship. You shouldn't just get citizenship because you rolled off a small boat and you managed to get refugee status and you've managed to live here, probably on the black economy, for 5 years. That shouldn't give you citizenship. Yet this is what we've got in this country. As soon as you examine it, the whole thing is, again, I used the phrase earlier, it's a house of cards. It's ridiculous. And it has to stop. And it's not going to stop while Keir Starmer is in government. We know that. But we can use this time to mainstream and normalize these facts. We can use this time to do that and to find new ways so that when the time is right and when we have sufficiently overthrown the mentality that dominates us at the moment, which is a kind of post-war mentality. Once we've overthrown that, it's going to take a few years, but the John Swinneys of this world, they're ideology will just collapse. It will just shatter on the rocks of reality. And one of the ways of doing it is to say you don't get to be a British citizen unless you've lived here for 25 years. What's wrong with that? You don't get to use immigration as any kind of way of seeking long-term indefinite leave to remain. If you come here as an immigrant, you're on a guest worker visa, which gets renewed every 3 years. And if we don't actually need you in 3 years' time, then your visa's not getting renewed and you're going to have to leave. That's how other countries do it. Why in this country, Britain, are we such a walkover? It's because nobody has yet challenged the ridiculous elements of British immigration, asylum, and citizenship policy. Nobody's done that. Well, it's high time that we did. It's high time we called into question the whole idea, not only of mass immigration, but of British citizenship. Why on earth do we give it to other people from around the world? And all of this was put into my head by looking at a tweet that went viral yesterday of some chap at an immigration ceremony. And we'll just put up the picture of that. And he didn't seem to really be taking it in the spirit in which it was intended, I have to say. There he is. Yesterday, I became British. Well, you became legally British on paper, I suppose you could say. I thought the ceremony will be nationalistic and a bit cringe until the Lord Mayor of Brighton started his speech with Assalamu alaikum. So that wound up a lot of people, needless to say, because, you know, if you're being granted citizenship of a country, you don't really talk in those terms. Anyway, he did. And in a sense, he did the public a favor, because it got everybody thinking about, why not is this guy getting citizenship, or indeed anybody like him, or indeed anybody from around the world getting citizenship at all. And so there was a lot of conversation about that, and our particular thoughts on the matter were informed by that useful debate, I have to say, useful debate. Conclusion is, sir, you shouldn't really have got citizenship. And if we have our way, nobody else is going to get it again, unless they've lived here for a generation with a clean criminal and driving record. And unless they pay 10,000, well, let's make it 50. No, let's make it £25,000 to purchase citizenship a year, £1,000 for every year you've lived here. Like it. I'm writing that down. I like that one. So, in other words, we make it difficult to get British citizenship because it is a precious possession. It's a precious possession. Good. Now, folks, we're going to do something a little different with our competition. We're going to ask you a question, not on this day in British history, which we don't have time for today, but on anything that has been asked, that has been mentioned in the program. So do we have a question? Do we have a question? And the answer, this is a question. Reform are projected to get 15 seats in the next Holyrood election, but which party are they tied with in third place? Okay, now the winner will get a little AFFG badge worth £6. This will be going to you tomorrow free of charge if you answer that question correctly. Now, what we're going to do, folks, is we're going to ask you to fire in the answer in the comment section on Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok. And the first person to get the answer in the comment section will get this wee badge winging their way to them. You'll need to send us an email with your address, obviously, but it will be heading to you. Okay, we're going to leave that a minute or so, and we'll come back to it. Now, I want to talk about, well, let's play the Swinney. Let's play the Swinney video. Let's play the Swinney video.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. John Swinney said this week that if his budget doesn't pass, we are playing right into the hands of Elon Musk. Yes, you heard that right. So the SNP's budget will cause misery to hard-working Scots and struggling businesses. But in the mind of Scotland's populist First Minister, that's a price we all must pay to defeat the shadowy forces of populism. Yeah. Was it John Swinney's New Year's resolution to distract from his failings by making ludicrous claims such as this?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I can see the shadowy face of populism right in front of me just now. I would say, Presiding Officer, that a budget that protects business from a challenging trading environment, that delivers a real terms increase in local government funding, that invests to reform and improve the National Health Service, that gives a huge boost to housing investment, that takes steps to eradicate child poverty and invests in a clean green transition for the Scottish economy and the environment is a budget worth supporting, and Mr Finlay should come to his senses and vote for the government's budget.
Well, I don't know what that was, if that was John Swinney trying to be hard there, but populism is a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. Well, exactly. What's wrong with populism? That's a good definition. I mean, goodness me. I know a lot of Scotland consider that our concerns as Scottish people have been denied by elite groups, which the leaders of these political parties, especially the ones who have been denying us, which is to say Tory, Labour and SNP, you know, they are not properly looking at what the people want. So maybe reform will mainstream the word populism. That would be good. Normalise the word populism and populist and make it something to be proud to be a populist. What's wrong with that? You know, that's where we need to be going. That's where we need to be going. But John Swinney trying to be hard, like, you know, hard man Swinney, doesn't work at all. And also, as I say, a man that's got no answer to the legitimate concerns that people have here in Scotland regarding the direction of the country. And if devolution means anything at all, it should mean the ability to stand up against the centre when the centre is doing something bad. And we would normally rely upon Holyrood to stand up against Westminster if Westminster's trying to flood Scotland with bogus asylum seekers and mass immigration. But does Swinney and Holyrood use their power to do that, to stand up for Scotland? No, they don't. But you know what? Times they are a-changing, and they're going to get a shock in 2026. And there's going to be people in Holyrood who will be able to articulate these things once again, or rather for the first time ever heard within the halls of Holyrood, an immigration restriction message, an immigration ending message. That would be amazing. And it's coming. It's coming, folks. Good stuff. Keep sending in your comments here on TikTok, folks. Love to hear from from you, especially if you agree with us or don't agree with us. Now, anybody looking to win this little badge, you can normally get this at our shop, but it's £6, but it can be yours for free if you answer this question correctly. Send in your answers to the comment section. Don't bother with an email. Send it into the comment section. We're going to see if this works tonight. The question: Reform are projected to get 15 seats in the next Holyrood election, but which party are they tied with in third place? Good stuff. Now, from talking about Scotland, I want to talk about Greenland, because I learned this amazing fact about Greenland just 2 or 3 days ago. You know, when you look at a map, it looks absolutely massive. And you think that must be like the biggest island in the world or something like that. Well, it's not actually, because the Mercator projection, which is used in maps, for some reason, don't ask me why, gives exaggerated measurements to many of the countries and continents, including especially Greenland. And the reason Greenland came into our consciousness is, of course, Donald Trump's claim that he wants it to come under American authority, whether that's as a 51st state or whether it is as some kind of protectorate. Only time will tell. But he does seem to be very serious about this. And so there's been quite a lot of chatter on the internet about Greenland, and a very good little video which actually puts the real scale of Greenland into perspective. Blew my mind when I saw it, and I just thought, we need to get this better known. We need to get this better known. So let's play that video now. Yeah, there you go. So there's a picture there of it just fitting into America. And there you go, into the contiguous states of America. And you see up there in the right-hand corner is what we imagine the size of Greenland to be, because that's the Mercator projection. But the actual true size of Greenland is there in the blue. It's still blooming big. I mean, it reaches from the top of the Canadian border down through and considerably into Mexico, but it's still nowhere near as big as it is. Okay, so some of the reasons why he might be interested, Trump may be interested in it. There was a thread that I saw. Let me see if I can just bring this up on Twitter. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this. Share screen. Somebody here called Ulrich Leike says, I'm Danish. I'm strongly in favour of striking a deal with Trump regarding Greenland. Well, I should say that we at A Force for Good don't really have a position on this at all, but I did find this material quite interesting. Today, the state of Greenland is a mess, according to this chap, economically and sociologically. Here's the big lines of why a deal with the United States is a win-win, as I say, according to this chap. First off, it's important to understand just how massive Greenland is. This is it. This is where I got the video. It's massive, but it's not as massive as you imagine it happens to be. It's a small economy and currently heavily dependent on Denmark. Its GDP is around 3 billion, and Greenland is heavily dependent on Denmark and receives a yearly subsidy of 600 million. It's got around 55,000 inhabitants and a total workforce of around 27,000. The rate of employment is low, just under 4%. Uh-oh, what does it say there? This is good, but makes it difficult for companies to attract qualified people. Well, don't be taking any lessons from the United Kingdom about attracting qualified people, please. The backbone of Greenland's economy is its fishing industry, which makes up for 98% of its exports, which is surprising, really, but unless you consider that there isn't really much of a market for snow. This surprised me. Unfortunately, the island faces severe social issues. It's got the highest rate of suicide in the world, high murder rate and issues with domestic violence, and a high alcoholic consumption per capita. And these are issues that obviously need to be addressed. And it's got a housing crisis. So it is, however, a treasure chest of untapped resources with rare earth oxides, uranium deposits, vast oil and gas reserves, precious metals, and some of the world's largest freshwater reserves. And the thing here is that Denmark just simply doesn't have the money to encourage exploration of these, because at the end of the day, it's going to be private companies that go in and explore all of that. But I guess Denmark would have to give them subsidies to help them. And despite being a wealthy country, Denmark is economically limited in its ability to support the development of Greenland. That's what I was just saying. And it's neglected the opportunities. And it now is at the stage where it makes sense to explore what Greenland has got. So why is Trump so interested in Greenland? Probably mainly strategic. Control of Arctic resources and trade routes, by which he means putting considerable military into the area in order to pressure the Ruskies who might be sailing through that area, in order to exercise geopolitical influence in the Arctic and maintain a military presence in a key region. Well, it has a military presence in Greenland at the moment, but clearly it's not enough for it. And the question is whether they'll get the people of Greenland on board. But that doesn't seem to be much of an issue at the moment, because America could easily buy every single person in Greenland. America could give every single person in Greenland $1 million, you know, and I'm sure they could convince people to become the 51st state. So we should see how this plays out. But it looks like America is actually very serious about that. Now, how is that going to affect Britain? Well, I suppose it won't affect Britain too much, providing that the Americans are friendly with us. But if the Americans are not friendly with us and, you know, give it a generation or so, the way America's going, it's probably not going to be, or it very possibly may not be. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I personally wouldn't encourage America to do that. It's rather imperialistic, I would say. And I don't think Britain should be in the business these days of encouraging countries to take over other countries, but it's certainly out of our hands for the moment. Any thoughts on that, folks? Send in your thoughts about Greenland. not something we think about very much, I should say, Greenland, but it suddenly thrust itself into the news. Now, we have a winner of our badge. The answer was Tories. Our Conservatives are jointly third place in the polls for the 2026 Holyrood election, which is amazing. And the winner's Christopher. Good stuff, Christopher. We'll get a badge sent straight off to you tomorrow morning. Great stuff. Hope you're doing well these days. Okay, folks, that's the top of the hour. We will be back next week, and we'll be keeping the British flag flying. We'll be keeping the British end up, as we always do, at a force for good. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for watching. We'll be back next Wednesday. Until then, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.